and we're now well into the year, into the 1st of February. And it's great also to have Claire Lawton. Hi, Claire, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Stephen, and everybody else that's online here. Hello, everybody.
Great. Yeah, it's great to have Claire from Acorn HR Support. Claire, you're a regular visitor of ours here on our Lunch and Learns, but it's the first time for this year. So Happy New Year. It seems quite late saying that to you, Claire, but it's good to have you with us.
Thank you. Well, we would have been okay yesterday because it was still January, so we'll just put our clocks back slightly and it's fine.
Indeed. Well, for those of you who are listening on either LinkedIn or Facebook, it's great to have you with us as well. Do please put any comments or questions for either Claire or myself this lunchtime. And I know we've already got a number of people signed in on the Zoom platform. Again, there's a Q&A box on Zoom. If you're on the social media platforms, please perhaps give us a like, a comment and a share. If you're back for more than once, if you've seen Claire and myself before, please do love us, give us a bit of love and tell us where you're listening from. It'd be lovely to hear where you're listening. But today it's really great to have Claire with us because I want to talk a bit about vaccines. We've heard all about the vaccines in the news over the last 24, 48 hours, or the shenanigans around the nationalism of vaccine supply, etc. But really want to talk today about how vaccines might be implemented and impact on our workplace, which is why it's great to have you along with us as well, Claire. But before we do that, I always want to just introduce our guest more formally, Claire. So tell us a bit more about yourself and Acorn and what you do.
So we've been described before as the paracetamol for HR issues. So our role,
apt, really.
Yes. So we're here to take away some of the pain that employers and employees may feel through their employment relationship. We've got an absolute passion of making sure that each individual shines in the role that they're in and delivers the best that they can for their employer and receive the best back from their employer. And we do that under the HR area of work, but we're so much more than just the contracts, handbooks, policies and procedures. It's kind of the way in which we work with our clients that's our area of expertise.
Brilliant. Well, it's great. Great to have you with us today, Claire. And for those who haven't heard about ActionCOACH before, we are a business coaching organisation. I know, Claire, you've worked with ActionCOACH before. We are a bit like, the analogy I always use is a bit like any key sports personality. They've always got a coach working alongside them. They don't teach them how to play the sport. They're there to give them the advice, the support and the guidance to play to the best of their ability. And that's what we do here at ActionCOACH for every business owner we are working with across Birmingham. So vaccine, this is the vaccine of 2021. We're in such a much better place, Claire, than when you and I last talked, sort of going through lockdown 1, lockdown 2, now we're in lockdown 3. But throughout all of those periods, we didn't have a vaccine in our sights. We've now got numerous different providers and suppliers, manufacturers of vaccine, sort of working so hard behind the scenes, not only to create the vaccine, but also to get it jabbed into all of our arms. And, we've all, I'm sure, now aware of people, friends, family, colleagues who may well have had the vaccine already for various reasons. But I just want to talk today a bit about the vaccine and how it might impact us reopening our businesses and from an HR perspective, impact on our procedures and policies at work, Claire. But before I get stuck into that, I always refer back to this, don't I? Every time you and I meet, I always bring this slide up because, whether it's about the vaccine, whether it's about lockdown, whether it's about any other aspect of this pandemic, we're all on a very personal journey. And I actually put a post on Facebook myself sort of 10 days ago. There are those people who want the vaccine, there are those people who don't want the vaccine, there are those people who want schools open, want schools closed, there's those people who want the shops open, there are those people who want retail closed. We've all got a view, and a very personal view, on every aspect of this pandemic. And I think it's really important, isn't it, Claire, just to remember that people are going on a very personal journey with this, as well as the journey we might perceive them to be on.
Yes, absolutely. It's all very personal to each individual. And what we need to do, in my view, is to recognise the journey that we go through, recognise where we are, and to gain the information that will help us move on to the next steps.
Absolutely.
So hopefully, as always with the Lunch and Learns, we gain that information, and hopefully there'll be some support today.
Absolutely. And yes, again, if you're listening to us on either the social media platforms or on Zoom, please do put any questions, any comments as Claire and I are talking. So we're here to learn from each other and learn from you, the listeners. So it'd be great to hear about your experience and any questions you've got as well. But I remember first showing this slide, Claire, when you and I met on Lunch and Learns back in March last year, because it's almost a year, isn't it? It's crazy, really. And just watching out for those colleagues, those friends, anybody we know and where they might be on this cycle, and making sure they don't get stuck in what I call this washing machine bit down here, the washing machine cycle at the bottom, and just reaching out, whatever the challenge is, to support and help each other. But the great news is, since lockdown one, is we have got these vaccines on the horizon now. And when I was thinking about what we, what aspects we're going to talk about today, Claire, my starting point was this gentleman. I'm sure you're familiar with him, Charlie Mullins from Plimlico Plumbers. Now, he was in the news before Christmas, I think it was, and his phrase was "no jab, no job." Which I thought was interesting. It's a bit like one of the airlines have talked about jab and go to go on their planes, but that's another topic for another time. But no jab, no job. So any new employer with his business, he wants them to have the jab. So where do we stand, Claire, as employers? What's your initial take on, employment law and the vaccine?
So if we step back and think about our current employees, rather than potentially what we may do for new employees, because that will then govern how that information then works through for new employees.
Great point.
So
take a step back.
I guess the question is, can we be compelled to have the vaccine? Well, again, step back, can the government compel us? And when we talk about compelled in employment, in law, it's about requiring you to have a vaccine. And the answer to that at the moment is no. There are some issues that went back to 1953 when the smallpox vaccine was in place, and parents were fined if children didn't have the vaccine.
Really?
But under the current legislation, teeth in, especially in terms of the COVID Act 2020, there is provision in that act to have the power to make a regulation to prevent or protect against controlling an incident or a spread of diseases. I can't get my teeth in today. However, it's just that they can make that regulation, but that would still have to be a new law, which would require Commons, Houses of Lords and royal assent for any law to be in place. So from a national perspective, we can't be enforced or compelled to go through a vaccine.
It reminds me, Claire, sort of about 20 years ago, I think it was now, with the MMR.
Yes.
When that came out, and there was big uncertainty with lots of parents about what impact it would have on their children, and there was this, sort of new campaign to encourage parents to give their children MMR. But I think there's probably still many people my age or younger that didn't have it. Not my age, probably younger actually. But indeed, it's the uncertainty and the unknown that people are worried about, isn't it? I guess.
And actually, one of the things that's really, really difficult in these circumstances, and specifically when you go back to MMR, is that the issues, from my recollection, that were raised around that was based on incorrect statistics. Mm-hmm. And one bit of information being used and sort of blown up out of all proportion for a certain gain that didn't actually reflect the true holistic picture. So, if we go back to the government, can the government enforce us to have a vaccine? No, they can't. By contrast, just as a point of interest, in America, they can. And Texas have already said that they will be requiring their citizens to have the vaccine.
Interesting place to watch then.
Yeah, it always is. Anyway, we haven't got time for that one, or Gin.
No.
So back to an employer. Can we enforce somebody to have a vaccine? In its principle, no, we can't enforce it. However, there may be circumstances in which we can sort of work through the discussion with an employee. So we can, so the two poles here are, you're already employed, we require you as a business to have a vaccine, you say no, we try and have the dialogue, and we come to that impasse. And the impasse then is, do you continue in employment without the vaccine, or are you dismissed? If you're dismissed, is that a lawful dismissal? So the points of interest there, if that were to happen, then the individual, providing they've got more than 2 years service, would then pursue an unlawful discrimination claim against the employer. Now, the employment tribunals are so backlogged, we're looking at a minimum of 12 months, maybe longer, under which any claims would come through to being heard, during which time the individual has potentially got no job, got no earnings, in a very difficult period of time. And the potential payout would be capped at a year's service. So there's a big issue there for an employee to address. But what we need to be thinking about is why, as an employer, would we be looking to request that people have a vaccine? So there's a few areas that we can be looking at here. The first point is that being hesitant or not having a vaccine is not a protected characteristic under employment law. So protected characteristics would be sex, race, age, disability. So
yes, that's the Equality Act you're referring to, isn't it, I think?
Yeah. So
yes.
not having a vaccine is not protected under that part of the legislation. So what we would then be looking at is unlawful termination. It may be possible for somebody who has a disability and is there covered under the protected characteristics that they may argue that having the vaccine may be an associated, or their refusal to have the vaccine may be an associated protection because the vaccine may impact. Yes.
Yeah, thinking about pregnancy would be the obvious one, possibly. I'm not an expert medically, but that might be somebody's fear of, yes.
Yes, that's right. So there may be an associated protection through the disability area.
Yeah.
Another potential discrimination that could be there is that there has been a lot of information and a lot of talk in the media about the vaccines containing pork or pork derivatives, and that this being against the beliefs of particularly the Muslim community and their beliefs of halal. And therefore, it would be indirect discrimination if you were to dismiss them because they have not had the vaccine. However, I have had confirmed that there are no pork products in the vaccines.
Right. It's really important, isn't it, to get the right facts, isn't it? That's part of the challenge.
It is, yes. And looking on the British Islamic Medical Association, there's some really good information on there about the vaccines, particularly for that community. And what's quite clear at the moment, because of the way in which the coronavirus is impacting on certain ethnic profiles, the imams are actually endorsing that people should be having the vaccine to protect them from what we know as a deadly condition.
Just very briefly refer back to the MMR conversation earlier on, and one of the challenges there was misinformation. And in a world of social media and in 2021, it is so hard to decipher what is factual and what is fiction.
Yes.
In terms of the vaccine, it's a challenge for any employer and any employee.
Yeah. It is. It's an absolute challenge, but one that we can work round by having the right information, the right facts, and the right dialogue with people. So, can we justify a dismissal as an employer? If we've got a group of people who are saying, no, I'm not going to be vaccinated, can we justify it? Well, if they have less than 2 years service, then they don't have the protection of fair dismissal rights. So it would then really be looking at the groups of people who have more than 2 years service, and it can be argued that that would be an unfair dismissal. So the government can't compel us to have a vaccine. It would be against the Human Rights Act, because of the respect of our private lives, to require us to have a vaccine, and any tribunal would look unfairly on that. There are a small but significant portion of the population who have some genuine, reasonable concerns about the vaccine, about how it's been tested, whether it's been tested efficiently for their knowledge and information. And that group of people, if we were to attempt to enforce them to have a vaccine, it would be deemed to be unreasonable. There may also be a group of people who believe that there is going to be an adverse effect of the vaccine for them personally. And we would guide that they seek medical advice as to what that's going to be and how that may be impacted on them. But essentially, if we dismiss somebody in the normal circumstances, it would be considered to be unreasonable.
I've got a question, Claire. You may well be coming to cover this, but I'll put it in there anyway in the melting pot. So you've just used the word reasonable there. Simon is asking, for somebody who doesn't want or hasn't had the vaccine, what would be considered reasonable measures in the workplace based on everyone else having had it?
Okay, so the measures that we have in place for protecting individuals in the workplace are still there. We know about the PPE that we need. We know about sanitisation. We know about the distance that we need to keep. And whilst the COVID is around and the virus is still contagious, then those things would stay in place. It would very much come down to what the role is with that individual and how it can be operated. There are some exceptions where we feel, and at the moment there's no employment law or no case law to guide us as to where it's going to go, but there are likely to be exceptions where it can be deemed to be a reasonable act of the employer to request that somebody has a vaccine. So they are in high-risk areas, NHS, care homes, providing personal care to individuals, where it is mission critical for them to be able to provide that support. And there is a very strong justification to ensure that individuals are immunised and not causing a greater risk of passing on the virus. So they're areas where it's mission critical that there can be a justifiable reason, but we would still be going through the steps. We would still be going through that consultation with the employee, looking at how or where we may be able to redeploy them, what the implications may be if there is a specific requirement within that job for them to have the vaccine.
So what I hear you saying here, Claire, is all the normal HR procedures need to be followed.
Always, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't just turn around and say, well, off you go, Jack, off you go.
Yeah.
So
somebody providing personal care, just as an example, and it would very much depend on the circumstances around it, is that you may be providing the care for that individual that is very close contact care, and they need to ensure that they're being looked after in a safe way. And it may be through their knowledge and information that they require somebody to be vaccinated, because they may be high risk of death if they contract the virus themselves. So in those sorts of circumstances, it can be reasonable to require that to be the place.
And of course, understanding not everyone's going to have access to the vaccine straight away. I guess
yeah. I mean, the issue there is that it has to be explicit as to why you would be requiring that role and that individual to be vaccinated, but you have to be looking at the alternatives. So
we have another question.
Yeah,
I think you're going to cover about the recruitment process, but perhaps we come on to that in a moment.
So before we get to the recruitment process, what about our current employees?
Yeah.
We could end up with two categories of employees. I've had conversations with people just in two categories or classes of citizens in the country. And the concerns around that. Well, as an employer, can we reasonably require people to have a vaccine? We've covered that. But have we got a reasonable justification to know if somebody has been vaccinated or not? Now, if you're in that care profession, frontline, at high risk of passing the virus on to somebody, we can justify that. But if you are in a manufacturing environment that's not got the biochemical or medical confines around it? Can we require the information as to who has or hasn't been vaccinated? No, we can't.
And that leads to a question from me, Claire, in terms of how we store that information as well. You know, how long can we store that information as an employer?
So if you're in the category and you've got specific roles that are in the category of being specific, it is required for that role, care professions, health, care homes, NHS, then the obtaining of that information and the storage of it is required as a legitimate business aim. And you can be specific as to how and where that information is stored and how long that is kept for. So you'd have to go into the detail of how long the vaccine is functioning within the body, whether there are updates required, how that would change if somebody changes jobs. So you'd have to be very specific in your GDPR policies as to how you would look at that information and store it and retain it.
Just thinking out here, it strikes me as something that's going to be maybe in the future, a bit like a DBS or CRB check. It's along those lines, isn't it? It's that sort of sensitive personal information.
It is, but only if you require it for the job that somebody is carrying out in those mission critical businesses. But kind of going on from that, what do we do with the workforce that we've got? Let's say you've got a workforce, 100 people working together, and there's that dialogue, who has and who hasn't. What we need to ensure as an employer is that we're not creating that double class of employees. We need to ensure that we are providing a self-working environment for those employees. That we want to ensure that people are not being bullied or harassed by their colleagues because they have or haven't had a vaccine.
Yes, there should be no discrimination in the workplace.
Not discrimination, because it's not a protected characteristic whether you have or haven't, but it is that behaviours around the way in which you engage with colleagues.
Yeah. Really challenging area, isn't it, Claire? You know, to make sure as business owners we get it right.
And we can be asking and we can be explaining to employees why we would be asking them to have the vaccine. But can we compel? Legally, we can't. And compelling is a legal term, which is basically making it a legal requirement. But can we have a lawful reason to dismiss if somebody doesn't have the vaccine as an employee? And that then follows into the recruitment side. How can you justify it being a requirement of the job to have a vaccine?
Do you think this will come down, Claire, to sort of, you know, I can imagine in future sort of legal test case, employment test case,
yes,
where go through the courts and determined in that manner.
Yeah, it will. And how Pimlico plumbers get on with it, we will stand the test of time.
Well, indeed, it goes back to the question that was in the chat box here on Zoom. You know, could this end up being the part of the job application process? You know, question the standard form: have you had the vaccination? Yes or no? An interesting question. And as you say, Charlie Mullins has stated publicly that they're going to be making sure that all new employees have had the jab. That's his prerogative to ask that question, I guess. But where it stands legally be another challenge.
Yes, and at the moment there's no case law or legal footing in order to demonstrate that that is an unlawful request from Pimlico to their prospective employees. How would you be able to justify it? Well, if they're plumbers that are going into the homes of individuals, and the individuals may want to know whether or not their plumbers are going to be safe. Well, currently we have ways of ensuring that people are safe with the PPE and the sanitising and requiring certain things to cover the health and safety aspects of them carrying out their role.
Indeed,
it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly that gets challenged.
Yes, and it does depend, exactly as you're right, I think, on the role and how they can, their defence in the court, I guess, as to why.
But remember, it's not a protected characteristic.
Yeah, indeed.
So whether it suddenly becomes one, or not suddenly, but it does become one over the passage of time.
Yes, and part of me, when I saw this story originally, wondered whether it was a bit of a PR stunt to, to differentiate. We talk a lot in Action Coach about unique selling points. What is your USP? Why would I buy from one person over another? And I do wonder when I saw this whether it was, a PR stunt.
Well, it may well be, and certainly one of the things that we need to consider, if we are going to dismiss somebody because they've not had the vaccine, or we've not been able to redeploy them into another role, or they have refused to redeploy, is what are the implications of the business? Because what can happen is that there's bad press about it. Whether or not there is a link to or affecting somebody's disability, it can be there seen as an associated issue. We can demonstrate that the vaccines don't have pork products in them, but you have to go through all of that aspect, all of that argument, all of those issues to be able to talk at that point. So for me, as always, the key thing is that communication. Why are we looking for it? Why do we want it there? There is actually quite a difference between somebody who is vaccine hesitant and somebody who's anti-vax, particularly if they're so if it's somebody who's hesitant, it may be that they don't have the knowledge or information to understand the position that we may be in.
Yes, and it just reminds me, just again, before we came on, I was just looking for some stats, and it's really hard to find stats at the moment, but this was just some research on adults sort of 50 to 80, and you're quite right, there are those who are unsure, which is very different to those who don't want.
Yes.
At the bottom there, it's interesting, as I say, there's a myriad of different views on vaccines and whether it's the right thing, the wrong thing, etc. But it is, yes, I think communication is so important, not only from government to all of us, from the manufacturers of vaccines to all of us, but also as employers, as business owners. Absolutely hit the nail on the head, Claire, as you always do, but take people on the journey with you is what I always say. Don't do to, do with.
Yes.
I think that's a much better way of implementing new uncertain ways of working as we go forwards.
But I mean, this is such a difficult time. We are looking to change the way in which we have conducted ourselves in society so fundamentally over the last year that this is just another element of it. And without the almost militant side of you've got to have it, it's what we've got to be doing, this is the right thing for everybody, or the other militant anti-vaxxing side, which is you can't do it, it's dangerous, it's not been tested enough, they're going to plant a chip in you. Those sides of the same argument are real issues that we have to face. Certainly in terms of the individuals who may be almost evangelical on the negativity of the vax, there could be an argument that it could be a fair dismissal if you ask them to leave the company because of their militant views. For example, if you are in the NHS or a highly regarded public area and you have got somebody in seniority who is anti-vax, because that may be totally inconsistent with the company's values.
So it's just thinking about the process and thinking about the reasons behind your decision making, and make sure you've got those very clear as a business owner.
Yes.
Before you make any decisions, and seek advice, Claire, from the likes of you at Acorn Support. It's important to make sure you've checked out the legality and clarity in your decision making. Have someone to talk to, bounce your ideas off, bounce your thinking off before you go and make a decision that you might find doesn't stand up to challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the key. As we know with anything that we do, there is the right time to have these conversations and the right way to have them, and to explain to the individuals why we're having this discussion. Why is it important to a business? Because we have had clients where 2 or 3 people in a fairly small group of employees have gone down with COVID, and it has impacted vastly their ability to carry on their work, because they need certain numbers, they need to ensure that people are fit and well. If we think about care homes or people who are offering personal care, there are health and safety risks if you go below a certain number of carers to your clients. If you go below that, you can't provide the service. And if you can't provide the service, particularly if you are caring for somebody who their family are going out to work, so they need that care in order for that individual to be looked after, the ramifications are huge.
Absolutely.
As we know from contracting coronavirus in the first place.
Now, Claire, I've got another question, but it's completely irrelevant to vaccine, not irrelevant, but it's not linked to vaccines. So
Okay.
Whilst we've got you, and I say to our listeners as well, we've not had Claire on for a little while now because something called Christmas got in the way. Otherwise, we'd have had our feels like being with the Queen, our weekly audience with you, Claire. Much more important, dare I say, than the Queen. But a question from James, he said, is about asking people to come into the workplace, because I think it's fair to say when you and I first did a Lunch and Learn back in March last year, Claire, there was much clearer, stricter guidelines, wasn't there, about staying at home and coming in. I mean, I'm sitting here opposite to building sites on a housing estate where they're still constructing new homes. In lockdown once, I could hear the birds sing. This lunchtime, I can hear the diggers and nothing else. So, there are industries where people are back in the workplace. But James is asking, can I make people come into the office versus staying at home in lockdown one? And what is the criteria he can implement? So just a bit of guidance around that, really.
So having a discussion with James to understand what the work is and what the implications are for each employee would be really important. We knew from a profession that going into lockdown and sending everybody home was much easier than it was getting people back. We know that. What is the
with any business, actually closing it down is much easier than reopening, isn't it? We across the board, not just from an HR perspective, but every perspective.
But every aspect. What are the guidelines? The guidelines are, if you can work from home, work from home. If you can avoid travel, don't travel unless it's a requirement. But if you can't work from home and there is work available and it can be done safely in the workplace, then let's continue working. I know, so when lockdown one, we closed our office, we were working from home, and that was great. And I am very fortunate that I have an office or a room at home that I can set up as my office. And we've got the children at home, we were managing homeschooling. But I know from my perspective with my mental health, having and running my own business, having work in home 24/7 with no escape, is that it was impacting on my mental health. And I've had a long journey. We all have mental health that may be good, maybe a little bit different or dicey, or maybe poor mental health. Well, I have a black dog, the analogy for depression, and I could see my black dog growing because I wasn't getting that escape and that time away. Now, back to James, what is the issue for his business primarily? Is there an impact of working from home that is affecting that? And is there an impact to his employees that are affecting that? And dialogue around all of those issues will determine how best to manage the coming months. For my team, having us in the same office, and we're not all in the same office at the same time, having us in the office and being able to have that dialogue, that discussion, that I'm just going to soundboard this, or you might overhear something and go, there's some information for you that you weren't aware of because I worked on that 3 years ago. That is really important. And it's understanding how working from home can negatively impact on a business. So I've waffled a lot, James.
Hey,
Very much depends, my lovely.
Okay, I've got another question from Joanne. Joanne, it's good to have you as well with us. She's asking how can she ask about people's views on the vaccine and whether they've had it or not? Is that a reasonable question?
Depends on the circumstances of the work. So go back to what we were talking about before. You may be able to demonstrate and be open with your employees as to why you would like to know. That information, we would guide that you don't segment your teams into with and without because of the behavioural implications that can come out of it. But if you can demonstrate through risk assessments and that assessment of the role that there is a legitimate business need for asking if somebody has the vaccine or not, then yes, you can go through that. But I would guide that you update your GDPR information to determine what information you're going to retain for what period of time and what the legitimate business need is.
That's great. And Claire, I'm thinking, the approach should be it's across the board. You do the same with everybody and not individual members of staff. Is that fair to say, or would you take a different approach?
It depends on what the role is. A care home, just as an example. In a care home, you've got people who are going to be doing all sorts of different roles. So if you've got somebody who's in admin, would you need to be asking them? You might share the information across the board as to what our approach is going to be and why, but is it going to be a significant requirement for somebody in admin or somebody who is in the laundry or somebody who's providing personal care? So it very much depends. But you can't just go, I like you, so I won't ask you. And I like you because I think you're going to give me the right answer, so I will ask you. You have to be quite specific as to what you're asking and why.
That's really helpful, Claire. And if you've got any more questions to our listeners on Zoom or on LinkedIn or Facebook, then please do post them in the comments box, put them in the Q&A box. If Claire and I can't reach out to you during the webinar, we'll absolutely connect with you afterwards. Please, put your contact details and we'll make sure we get it back in touch with you. Claire, just while we've got you with us this Lunch and Learn, is there, we're back in lockdown, we've got parents at home, homeschooling, variety of different scenarios going on. I say, but slightly different approach to schooling this time. I think some schools have got more than just the key workers in, but it's, what is a key worker? Who is a key worker these days? The lines have been blurred, I think, a lot more in this lockdown. But any more sort of advice, guidance from an HR perspective that as business owners we might want to be taking into account right now? What have been the key issues you've been coming across and things we might want to be considering at the moment? And it's a bit of a broad question, but just whilst we've got you here.
I haven't got time to answer that, Steve. No, there's no gin and tonic in my hand.
It's been lovely.
No, I jest.
I'll tell you what, I had a lovely bottle of gin for Christmas. It lights up.
Oh, got one of those Marks and Spencer ones.
Yes,
You jammy dodger. They are like gold dust, quite literally.
Here's my promise, Claire. I'll keep it close until you and I can meet. How's that?
Don't do that. Don't do that, because if you need a gin, then have one. But I'll hold you to buying me a gin and tonic when we can meet. But yeah, gin is for drinking, not for saving. Serious. I have to think seriously. Dialogue with employees is key. We have people who are working from home and are so dedicated to their job that they are doing everything that they can to carry on that job, whilst at the same time they have children, they have parents that they may be concerned for, they may have their partner who is in a high risk area and hasn't had the vaccine. All of these things are going on. But let's talk about things. Let's have a laugh about gin and tonic when we need to, or cakes, or whatever we might need to do. But talk about things. And And also say to your team, so when we think back to what James was asking as to whether we should be getting people back, actually say to your employees, what are the issues? Rather than us assume what's going on. In terms of managing life and the work and the children and everything else, is having a routine is key. From a mental health perspective, having a routine is key. So being able to establish that is fantastic. Very early on, after the first lockdown, I got my children to carry on with their school day, 9 till 3. You know, when we didn't have the structure of classes from the school, I said, you know what your program is? So if it's maths and you haven't got any maths work, create some, look online. If it's art, paint or draw something, or look at colours, or if it's PE, well, you know, you can run up and down the stairs as long as I'm not on a call at the time, but kind of create that same pattern. And for my girls, that has helped them carry on with the work that they're doing. And for me, it allowed me to know that they had something that they knew that they were doing during that time.
I think it's fair to say that certainly I can talk on a personal experience. You know, lockdown number 3 has certainly taken a hit on my mental health. You know, having, and I've not been up to Birmingham now since March last year. I've not seen my colleagues since March last year. Now, you know, I could have come up when lockdown eased a bit, but then Birmingham had its own restrictions. You know, it's been a challenge, hasn't it? For those who are wondering where I am, I'm actually based down in Kent, and I used to commute up to Birmingham on a weekly basis. But I think everyone is getting fatigued, aren't they, Claire, in terms of, you know, mental health and physical health, and just wants to get out. And that's why the restrictions are so much harder to implement. And we've seen that in the news, haven't we? You know, people taking a different view on it on a third time round. But, you know, I think if we can, my message is just, you know, stick with it. We're almost there in terms of the vaccine. You know, we've talked a lot about the vaccine this lunchtime. You know, let's all stick together and make sure we do what we can to get through this awful scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and talk about honestly what the implications are for your business and for your employees. And reach out to the people who are there to help. You know, that what you're doing in terms of lunch and learn is fantastic. And, you know, I really commend you for being able to do that and to get mad fools like me on, you know, when you're stuck without anybody else.
Not at all.
But it's having those different views, being able to have that discussion and to be able to say, I don't have the answers, or this is pretty pants at the moment. Can I just talk it through? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where to go. And it's all going on like this in my head. Reach out to people who are there and can help and care.
Brilliant. And that just reminds me to share that our lunch and learns have changed a bit this year. So on a Monday, we've got expert speakers such as Claire coming in, talking about different aspects of business, whether it's marketing, HR, sales. But on Wednesdays, we're doing something slightly different. And that's just reaching out to business owners in the Birmingham community and asking them to share their journey. You know, what was it like when they started the business? What's 2020 been like? And how do they see the business in their sector, in their industry going forward? And what are they doing to plan for 2021? So we do look forward to hearing and working with many business owners. And this Wednesday, we're talking to Paul Palmer, who is a solicitor who does all everything to do with legal wills and power of attorneys, and how he has had to pivot his business, not just what the business does, but how he does his business, and how he's changed over the last year. And I know Claire, you're kindly coming back to talk us about that in the future as well. But it is really interesting. I think it's really encouraging and supportive to each other, to know that we're not isolated in this, you know, this pandemic. We can learn from each other's experience, and we can see how other people have taken their businesses forwards, and where things have been challenging and where they found solutions. So I think it's great to have that perspective on and to hear about other people's journeys on a Wednesday lunchtime. So I do hope you'll join us on Wednesdays to hear from other business owners, including Claire in a few weeks' time. But Claire, just before we finish, we've been a good 45-ish minutes so far, so it's great and you know, full of packed with content and great advice from you. I've got your details on the screen, Claire, for anybody who's listening, either on LinkedIn, Facebook, or on Zoom. If they've got any questions or want to sort of sound out their thoughts, I'm guessing picking up the phone to you is the first port of call. You'll be having to have those conversations initially. Sort of a bit of a, dare I say, I don't offer your services for free, but that sort of, you know, initial conversation will certainly be free of charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will always have that initial discussion to see whether it's something that we can support with, or we can signpost somebody into the right direction for that right support. Knowing that you can get help is the first step. I said at the beginning, it's the headaches of HR that come into play, and the headaches of businesses you will coach on. But if you've got a niggle, if you've woken up in the middle of the night thinking about a business issue that may have an employee impact, pick up the phone. We'll see if we can help, because that's where we get our buzz, is to helping our colleagues in not worrying and not having the headaches.
Indeed, I talk to many clients on a weekly basis, Claire, and not only the head of production, but the head of HR, head of finance, head of marketing. And so my advice to any one of them, if they've got an HR query, is, if in doubt, seek Claire out. Claire can give you some great advice. And here at Action Coach, we only work with the best contacts, the best clients, and the best colleagues in different industries, and that's why we've got Claire on today. So if you've got any queries, if you're in doubt, seek Claire out at Acorn. Her details are on the screen, and she will absolutely give you that, what I would like to say, sort of like an unfettered, clear advice, Claire, that somebody can come away with a clear sense of direction of what the right thing to do is in that scenario. And I guess not every scenario is going to be straightforward, but you're giving your best advice based
Absolutely.
on
Absolutely. And we're not afraid of saying, you said what? And you were expecting what outcome? Because that sometimes happens. But we will always endeavour to unravel a situation and get it back on track, even if it's a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, even if the firing pistol started and you're already down the track, at least, better to stop the race at that point and backtrack than carry on the same track.
Yeah, because I'm not good at running.
But no, absolutely, do seek Claire's advice, and all of her colleagues at Acorn. They're great team, and they will make sure you have the right advice. And particularly as we, I'm sure vaccine isn't the only challenge that we're going to be facing in terms of HR. There's lots of aspects of this pandemic. We've touched on working from home. We've touched on, roles and responsibilities and how the workplace is changing. I've spoken to some great clients and colleagues who've really changed their business. And as a result of changing their business, the roles they need in the workplace have changed as well. How do you deal with that? Because at the end of every role, every job description is a human being, a person who is reliant on your employment. So it's about making sure we do the right things and make the right decisions in the most informed way possible. And that's where great advice from the likes of you, Claire, comes in. It'll be interesting to see what happens with good old Charlie. I'm sure that story hasn't ended, and I'm sure we'll be seeing that in the news as we go forward.
Yes.
Just before we finish, for those who are listening to us today, I've talked a lot about how the support that Claire can give. We've also got some great support and advice to offer. And if you're interested in finding more about how you can work with Action Coach in your business, the best starting point is our 30X program. That's 30 years of business experience put into 15 hours of video. That's just 30 minutes a day. Doesn't have to be every day. 30 minutes or 30 days you can complete the course, but as long as short as you like. I know people actually, Claire, have done it in a week. They've just, a bit like a driving test, in 1 week, just blitzed it. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it. The reason I say that is because it's only £30 a week to sign up, and there's no contract length. So the direct debit is in your hands. If you're interested in working on your business, you can sign up for 1 week, 2 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever suits you. If you've got a bit of spare time to work on your business right now, it may make the difference between a business just surviving or thriving well into the future. So we'd love to have that conversation with you about our online 30X program and how we can support you. But for now, it's been great having you, Claire, join us. Delighted that I've given you 12 minutes to go and have your lunch as well. Before you committed from 12 till 1, but it feels like the right time to finish. We don't need to, there's no more questions come in, but if you do have questions, then please do contact us. Even if you're watching this video online afterwards, please do make contact with either Claire or myself. We'd love to have that conversation.
Yes, please do.
But for now, thank you to all our listeners that I can see logged in. Thank you to everyone on FaceTime, not FaceTime, on Facebook and LinkedIn. But most of all, thank you to you, Claire, for joining us. First time in 2021, and I'm sure not the last. And I will hold you and uphold my own promise, Claire, to that gin and tonic when we meet in person. Who knows?
Yes, but don't save that sparkly one. You've got to drink that. That's too good to save.
I will be opening it at some point when I've got something to celebrate, which I'm sure, I hope won't be too long into the future.
Stephen, it's for drinking, not for saving. Every day is a day for celebration.
What you don't know, Claire, is I've got 2 other bottles open at the moment.
Only 2. This is a separate conversation. I need to coach you on your sharing the gin.
Perhaps we should do another lunch and learn on gin and tonics, Claire. That'd be.
Oh, I'm your lady for that. Definitely.
That'd be a Friday lunch and learn. But there we go.
I have an education spot for a networking group that I've done, which is all about gin and one-to-ones.
There we go. Well, you and I need to have that catch up, and then we'll learn more about that. But anyway, thank you so much, Claire, for joining us.
Thank you.
Wish our best wishes to you and all your colleagues at Acorn, and we look forward to catching up very soon. And to all our listeners, have a safe and great week, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday at 12. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.